The drama in Minneapolis has reached a boiling point because a judge has been exposed for allegedly harboring $100 million in cartel funds.
In Minneapolis so far, we've brought hundreds of criminals off the streets that were dangerous to society and dangerous to that community.
What most people do not realize is that this single raid is connected to a much larger scheme involving hundreds of millions of dollars in stolen public funds and terror financing. It is a story full of secrets, betrayal, and a federal surge that is changing everything overnight. You are about to learn things about the justice system that will make you look at every court case differently. The underground vault of a Twin Cities legend. The air was cold and thin when federal agents surrounded the perimeter of the judge's massive estate, a place that symbolized power and respect in the community. They had been watching the house for months, tracking strange movements and late-night arrivals that did not fit the life of a public servant. When the order was given to move in, they did not expect to find a normal home office. But instead, they found a house that had been turned into a fortress for the Sinaloa cartel. Inside the walls, hidden behind false panels and deep in the basement, were stacks of cash that seemed to never end. $100 million is a number that is hard to visualize, but agents described it as a literal mountain of paper that represented years of illegal activity and compromised justice. This judge had spent years sitting on the bench, making decisions that affected the lives of thousands of people. Yet all the while, she was allegedly acting as a safe house for substance lords. The investigation started small, looking into a string of weird financial moves, but it quickly grew into the largest corruption case in the history of the state. Agents found that the money was being moved in small amounts at first, but eventually, the judge became a primary node for the cartel's Midwest operations. It is not that simple, though, because this was not just about substances. The mansion was also a hub for documents and high-tech communication gear that allowed the cartel to stay one step ahead of the local police. The shockwaves from this discovery were felt immediately in the local government. For years, there had been rumors that certain judges were being too soft on high-level traffickers, throwing out cases that seemed like easy wins for the state. Now, those rulings are being looked at under a magnifying glass. Every single case this judge ever touched is being reviewed to see if the cartel was paying for specific outcomes. This raid did not just find money. It found evidence that the very foundation of the Minneapolis legal system was being eaten away from the inside by greed and fear. Everything seemed perfect on the surface, until the feds realized the law was being sold for profit. While the mansion raid was the biggest headline, the money had to come from somewhere, and that leads us to a massive fraud ring that was draining the state dry. In the middle of 2024, the Attorney General charged several individuals with stealing over $7 million from Medicaid. But that was just a tiny piece of the puzzle. Prosecutors eventually documented a scheme that ran for 5 years, where companies were billing the government for services that never even happened. They were charging for personal care that was never given to patients, and using the money to buy luxury cars and jewelry. $100 million in cartel cash does not just appear out of nowhere. It gets laundered through these fake businesses until it looks clean. In 2025, a jury was convinced that the fraud was obvious and they convicted the people involved. But then something strange happened. A different judge stepped in and threw out the entire conviction, claiming the evidence was not good enough. This move sent a clear message to the fraudsters that they were protected as long as they had the right connections. The jurors were in total shock because they had seen the records and the bank statements with their own eyes. It felt like the system was working against the truth. And that is when federal agents started to realize that the fraud and the cartels were working together in a massive partnership. Minnesota has become the center of the largest fraud operations in the history of the country. Nonprofits that were supposed to feed children during the pandemic were actually stealing hundreds of millions of dollars. By late 2025, nearly 100 people were charged with stealing $250 million. Most of these people were using the money to build empires back in their home countries or to fund dangerous groups overseas. A retired intelligence officer even warned that this money was being traced back to al-Shabaab through secret transfer networks. These warnings were ignored by state officials for years, which allowed the criminals to get stronger and move more money every single day. The secret money trail led to a web of terror that the state chose to ignore. The streets of Minneapolis under federal siege. By the time January of 2026 arrived, the federal government had seen enough, and they decided to take matters into their own hands. Between 2,000 and 3,000 federal agents flooded the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul in a massive surge called Operation Metro Surge. They were not just looking for paperwork anymore, they were hunting down people who had committed violent acts like robbery and assault. The feds were frustrated because the state government had been releasing dangerous individuals back onto the streets instead of letting them be processed for deportation. This led to a huge clash between the people running the state and the people running the country. The Secretary of Homeland Security even showed up on the scene to watch the arrests happen in real time. She wanted to send a message that the federal government viewed the situation in Minnesota as a national security crisis. Over 480,000 criminal illegal aliens had been arrested across the country, but Minneapolis was the main target because it had become a safe place for cartel members to hide. Agents were raiding schools, places of worship, and private homes to find the people who were linked to the trafficking networks. It was a chaotic time, and the local leaders were telling the public not to trust the feds, even as the feds were pulling violent criminals off the streets. The situation became even more intense when records showed that the governor had released hundreds of criminals who should have been in federal custody. Many of these people were known substance traffickers who went right back to work for the Sinaloa cartel. This decision made the federal government open a formal investigation into the state leadership for obstructing the law. There were even public warnings that the Insurrection Act could be used if the state did not start cooperating with the federal agents. It felt like a war was breaking out between two different versions of the law, and the people of Minneapolis were caught right in the middle. The battle for control of the city turned into a standoff between state power and federal authority. The presence of the cartel in the Midwest is not just a theory. It is a documented fact that federal agents have been tracking for over 5 years. A man named Clinton James Ward was a key part of this, acting as a middleman between the local dealers and the big bosses in Mexico. After he was arrested in 2019, he did something very bold by fleeing to Jalisco, Mexico. He did not just hide, he became a high-level operator for the Sinaloa cartel and set up what agents called a Mexican storefront. This meant that buyers in Minneapolis could order substances as if they were dealing with a local person, while Ward handled the shipping from cartel warehouses in Mexico. Ward was not moving small amounts of product. He was moving massive shipments of pills and powder through trusted routes that had been used for years. He lived a life of extreme luxury in Mexico, while his operations flooded the streets of the Midwest with danger. Even after he was caught and brought back to the United States in 2024, the network did not stop. The cartel simply put new people in charge of the routes he had built. They used the same phones and the same warehouses, showing that the infrastructure was much bigger than just one person. The money kept moving, and the supply lines stayed open despite the best efforts of the police. In late 2025, agents seized over 100 pounds of illegal substances and 120,000 counterfeit pills from a single trafficking ring. This was enough to hurt thousands of people in the community. The DEA found that these operations were all connected to major hubs in Denver and Salt Lake City, which served as the main points for moving product into Minneapolis. It was a massive network that operated across state lines and international borders, and it was all being managed by people who knew exactly how to use the local laws to stay safe. The cartel's grip on the city was tighter than anyone in the government wanted to admit. The final mystery of the Minnesota sanctuary. The skyline of Minneapolis no longer represents commerce. It represents a siege. We are currently witnessing a city paralyzed by the most aggressive enforcement operation in its history, a tectonic collision between local sovereignty and federal iron. The state government remains locked in a high-stakes legal guerrilla war against the feds, firing off lawsuits like flares in a dark room. They claim to protect civil liberties, but the optics suggest they are merely protecting the architects of a shadow state. When a federal judge issued that restraining order, handcuffing agents while the cartel breathed a sigh of relief, the message was clear. The law is now a weapon of delay. This is not just a legal bottleneck. It is a calculated stall. While attorneys argue over the semantics of reasonable force, the cartel's liquid assets, mountains of shrink-wrapped hundreds, sit in evidence lockers like ticking time bombs. But here is where the theories turn radioactive. Whispers in the corridors of the Justice Department suggest that the money in those lockers is already gone. A wild, growing theory claims that a sophisticated switch occurred during the initial chaos of the raids, replacing real currency with high-fidelity counterfeits printed by a state-sponsored actor. If true, the feds aren't guarding a fortune, they are guarding a pile of paper meant to embarrass the central bank. Shadow empires grow where the light dies. The judge in the mansion was the first domino, but he wasn't the architect. He was a regional teller for a much larger bank. The scale is staggering. We've seen hundreds of millions stolen, cartel networks woven into the fabric of public works, and juries systematically bypassed by powerful judicial figures. If $100 million can be stuffed into the crawl spaces of a single Minneapolis home, the math for Chicago and New York becomes apocalyptic. Some analysts suggest that we aren't looking at simple corruption, but a parallel sovereign. This theory posits that the cartels have stopped being criminals and have started being the bank of last resort for cash-strapped municipalities. Justice is a mask for the heist. In this secret world, the judge didn't just take bribes, he managed a hedge fund of human misery. Another theory gaining traction among the investigators is the Black Ledger hypothesis. It suggests that the $100 million found wasn't meant for luxury, but was a physical cold wallet intended to fund a private security force that would rival the National Guard. Imagine a city where the police answer to the state, the feds answer to DC, and the judge's men answer only to the ledger. This isn't just a breakdown of order. It's the construction of a new, darker order. Every dollar carries a silent death warrant. The public is finally starting to see the strings. People are asking the terrifying question, is the law actually being enforced? Or are we watching a scripted performance designed to keep the masses pacified, while the real power is consolidated by those with the largest stacks of currency? The show of enforcement provides the illusion of stability, but the rapid expansion of the suspect list tells a different story. Every day, more names are added: city council members, tech moguls, even high-ranking military liaisons. It suggests a council of rogues that extends far beyond one mansion in Minnesota. The truth will burn the whole house. We are looking at a secret world finally forced into the blinding light of day. The mystery of the judge banker is just the tip of the spear. The facts already unearthed are enough to shatter our collective trust in the bench forever. Whether this represents the birth of a new era of accountability or the final, gasping breath of a collapsing republic remains to be seen. The investigation is moving at a velocity that suggests the feds are terrified of what might happen if they slow down. They aren't just chasing criminals, they are racing against a total systemic reset. The streets are bleeding ink and gold. The silence from the higher-ups is deafening. There is a wilder theory yet that the feds already knew, that this entire raid was a move by one faction of the deep state to cannibalize the assets of another. In this scenario, the judge was a sacrificial lamb offered up to satisfy the public's hunger for justice, while the real bankers move their operations to offshore digital havens. We are watching the transition from physical corruption to a ghost network that no raid can touch. The secrets are coming out, but by the time we understand the game, the players will have already changed the board. No one is safe from the truth. Does the discovery of $100 million in a judge's home prove the entire system is broken? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, like this video, and subscribe for more.